Just want to talk about four main areas, and it's good we've got a selection of people on. And as we kind of started with it, as soon as you open up a company or you become a director of a company, you've got 7 responsibilities. If how many people know that? And one of the most basic is actually to understand that you always work within the Articles of Association for your company. So one of the most important things to do is, if you've used an accountant to open up your company, sit down with them and find out what those are. What is it that you're allowed to do? There's a little bit more flexibility these days, but when you open up a company, you have to choose what they call an SIC code, which is just a categorization, and it sets out the basic idea of what you're going to do. And if you want to do more than one thing, then you have to choose more than one code. And some of those are very important. One of my clients is a podiatrist. So as he's providing health services, he doesn't have to charge VAT. So depending on what you do and how you classify yourself, it can have knock-on implications all the way down the track. With everything about what's in the Companies Act and these 7 primary responsibilities, common sense gets you a long way, but you're going to fall over. So we looked at we heard about the furlough arrangements and what directors could and couldn't do if they were going to put themselves on furlough. The one thing you were still allowed to do, because it is a basic responsibility or obligation of a director, is to promote the success of their company. So you can still do all your posts on social media, still keep on your website, but as a director, you can't go and do any fee-earning work, or you shouldn't. And that's what HMRC and all of the other government investigations is going to be centering on. They may do a spot check. They may just ramp up their workforce and go through as many applications for furlough as possible. What do people on here feel about what they have to do as a director of their own company? Are they worried by what they have to do?
I'm sorry, go on.
It's interesting. I've not looked at the Articles Association in my business. I have a trusted accountant, so I set the business up, private limited company. I know what I'm doing, and I thought my prime responsibility is to remain solvent, effectively. But that's I will go. I'll dig them out and I'll see what's in there. I know we've gone through a SIC code. Like I say, I do have a complete trust in my accountant, but that's an eye opener for me.
Ian, couple of quick questions, and I'm the same, if I'm being frank. I think the relationship you've got with your accountant means that you hope that these sort of things are dealt with. But what happens if you're the remit of your business broadens over time? So for us, we started out as a private client practice, and now we do private and corporate. So what happens in terms of that?
Well, you should be doing, or actually you have to do, an annual return to Companies House. So in your annual return, and for you, Chris, I think you would need an audit statement as well, that the reach of your business has expanded and that you are therefore adding a SIC code to your company register. So it's all part of that annual update. It's not onerous as such, but it's just important to keep on top of it. It's one of those little things to make sure that you keep on top of.
And in your experience, Ian, does the most accountants on top of this? I suppose that's a broad question because it depends on the quality of the accountant, right?
There are some accountants that I know that are so in tune with their clients that yes, they're on top of it, and they will help them with all of this stuff. There are others that I know that only provide a check-in twice a year to do their semi-annual accounts, to do their VAT returns, and to provide them with their end-of-year balance sheet and stuff. They won't be looking at it. So look at the relationship you got with your accountant.
Cool. So that's number one. What's number two?
So the other thing I want to talk about is manage or avoid conflicts of interest. That's a responsibility of a director. It's one of the most talked about parts of the obligations because conflicts of interest can arise at a very personal level. But it kind of wraps in with, you know, as a director of the business, you shouldn't sit there and say nothing when you know something that's going on is wrong.
Yeah.
You're duty bound to point out this isn't in line with what we said we would do, any kind of thing like that. Bring it up in the regular meetings you have as senior management and get people talking about stuff.
Can you give us a practical example of that?
Well, there's going to be a lot of discussion over the next 6 to 9 months as restrictions ease about how to interpret the Health and Safety Act with remote working. Do people need to issue new contract of employment to give people 2 places of work? Because a normal contract of employment will provide a place of work, or it will explain how a company provides the employee with a safe workplace, which is what the employer's responsibility is. Carol nodding, and poor Carol in the snow with people walking out in the streets. We've heard her on her slot on here before reporting it wasn't safe for them to be out. So hats off to Carol. It's avoiding a conflict of interest. So no, spot on. But it even comes down to if people are working from home where they would normally work in an office, the obligation is to make sure that that environment is as safe as their work office space as much as possible. So they should be sent a DSE assessment for their workspace at home. People shouldn't be working off of a sofa or a bed for someone that's, for example, in a multi-occupancy property.
This raises an interesting point, doesn't it? Because I've had conversations over the past few weeks with people who are saying that we are bringing people back to the office or back to wherever because their working from home environments aren't suitable for whatever reason. So how do you get the balance right between, the obligations you've got between protecting them against, COVID and making sure you meet the rules, but also making sure they've got a safe working environment at home?
Well, this is it. And again, Sharon could shed more light on this, but there's a £100 per person taxable allowance that HMRC have given to help set people up at home. But if you're working from your dining room table with a laptop, you need to buy a desk riser. You need to buy a second keyboard. You need to buy a good standard chair. You'll need to buy the supports to use the keyboard, the mouse, etc. You'll be hard pushed, particularly at the minute, to get all that for 200 quid. So there's a conflict between what HMRC you can spend and what the Health and Safety Act says or implies you should be doing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So talk to me about what else is on your list.
Well, of course, I couldn't not talk about data protection because a lot of people know me for that. And everyone normally feels that it's a tick box exercise and that it's something that they do grudgingly. The thing is, if you are open with how you conduct your business, we've all been talking this morning about building relationships and building trust. If you've got a good privacy policy on your website that's up to date legally, you're not quoting the wrong act, you're not trying to hide what you do, then it's a good advert for how professional you want to be. And when you then transfer that same principle to what happens inside your business, you can avoid a lot of troubles. So here's a practical example. In January, the ICO published the details of a case where an employee from the RAC illegally downloaded data from its website, sold it, and from the sale of the information, a lot of unsolicited marketing calls were made. So complaints were raised by policyholders of insurance companies initially to say, oh, I'm getting a lot more calls than usual, da, 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 da. And they found out about what happened. Now, whilst the RAC have been mentioned, there's been no levy or enforcement order placed upon them. The insurance companies that were involved in the investigation, they were exonerated for what they were doing, all because they had good policies and procedures and they helped the ICO identify what happened. The actual perpetrators, the person that stole the data and the person that then used it to send out the unsolicited marketing messages, they got caught up in a little known act called the Computer Misuse Act. It was actually passed in 1990. And the two perpetrators got 8-month prison sentences and they were suspended for 2 years. Now, people think that just because you don't get data protection right, there's nothing wrong with it. No, there's no consequence. There are consequences. And even for a small business, if you've not done anything and you get found out, you lose 4% of your turnover, not your profit, your turnover. Who would want to lose that amount of money out of the business? So that's just on those kind of things. And whilst I can understand people saying, oh, it's a tick box exercise, if you use common sense, you'll be all right. But the devil is in the detail. And if you want to be sure that you're going to be covered, get everything that you do written down. It doesn't have to be fancy. The most important thing is that you use plain language to explain to people what you do and how you do it. So privacy policies don't and shouldn't be, hundreds of pages long. It's all about keeping it simple and making sure that people can understand what you do. And then once someone has an ongoing relationship with you, then the documents can get a bit more lengthy. I do that myself. I have a separate set of terms and conditions. I have a separate servicing contract. But all that's on my website is my privacy policy. So it's just making sure you've got everything stacked up in a row.
Thanks, Ian. I really appreciate that. Any questions so far from anybody? No? Ian, so data protection is really important. One question that I had was, if you had a rogue employee, for whatever reason in your workforce, but you as an organisation made sure that you dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, are you then protected and the liability sits with the employee?
You would have a lot of sway with the ICO when they came to do the investigation. Whether you would be completely exonerated, I can't tell. I mean, I know that when was it in January? Again, the FCA put out a notice on its website to say that anyone with a what's the term, Chris? Anyone who undertakes regulated activities, is that the right term?
Yeah, authorised. I mean, there's loads of different terms, but authorised individual, authorised.
Need to make sure that they comply with data protection policies. I think they'd come across a fair few that hadn't. And there's other professions that do the same thing. They don't make it part of their own code of practice. It's important to make sure that you cover everything that's required by your governing body. And I'll see you.
Ian, Rachel made a really fair point, actually. I mean, it's part of our FCA authorisation that we need to be registered with the ICO and pay their fees and do whatever we need to. But all businesses hold data, don't they? So, number one, because I'm scared of using too many acronyms. You know, we've used the ICO and the RAC, and let's chuck a few more in there. BBR, whatever. But let's explain what the ICO is and just talk very briefly in the few minutes we've got left about what a business's obligation is to make sure when they hold data. And does that include any data? Does that include email addresses? Help us understand a bit about that.
Right. So the whole thing about data protection is to protect the rights and freedoms of individuals. So when it comes to data protection, what you're worried about is personal data. And anything that can help to identify a person. So as you say, Chris, it could be an email, an address, a name, a national insurance number, an NHS number, a telephone number, all of those, a car registration number, there you go, another one. All of those things can be used by those that have the knowledge to identify people. So even if you're running a business, if you have personalised email addresses, so john.smith@debenhams.com, our poor Debenhams is in demise at the minute, that would count as personal information. So it has to be treated in the same way that john.smith@hotmail.com would need to be treated. It's personal.
So that might include names on a list of existing clients and
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So what does a company, as Julie said, there's not enough companies at the minute that, you know, like when you start a business, that you're expected to know a lot of this, right? So what happens about that somebody starts a business from brand new? What do they need to do to make sure that they're meeting, as a minimum, the data protection rules? Because I'm assuming you've got to register with the ICO.
Yeah, so the ICO, ICO with Information Commissioner's Office, they are the regulatory body that looks after all of the issues surrounding data protection, which includes the one for public services. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I should have had it written down. But yeah, so it's the Protection Act, the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation, or Freedom of Information Act, that's the one. So those are the three things that they will primarily look after. They act very closely with Action Fraud, of course, for all of the unsolicited calls and stuff. And someone makes a complaint to the ICO about what you've done, then they'll start the investigation trail. So what you have to have realistically is a set of policies and procedures that will set out how you deal with
breaches.
Yeah, and the breaches. So you've got the data policy, the marketing policy, which will tell you what you're allowed to do in terms of marketing and data protection, information security policy, and privacy policy. They're the four main policies. And underneath that, you will have other processes that will help the regulator understand, if you're investigated, how you use the data. So one of the byproducts of doing a data policy should be a retention schedule. How long do you keep data for particular processes?
Great stuff. In the couple of minutes we've got left, are there any other really important points you think a business should be aware of?
I think that the only other thing to say is, you know, if you haven't got an accountant that has got a regular relationship with you, find one. They really do help you. I know we've got both Sharon and Janet, part of HMB. They both like to have really good relationships with their clients. So, you know, I would say speak to accountants like that, and they'll help you avoid some of the pitfalls that I don't know about.
Yeah, 100%. Any questions for him based on that?
Yeah, could I ask a quick question?
Of course you can, Russ.
Yeah.
Now this is, and you, Ian, you've really piqued Russ. I mean, that must have been impressive if Russ is asking a question. Go on, Russ.
So I just want to know, publicly held information, like the information you take off Facebook, that sort of stuff, can you then use that, or are you not allowed to use that?
So, yeah, what happens if it's out in the public domain already?
Okay, so it's an interesting one. So information that's out in the public domain, voting registers, those kind of things. What the law says is that you can use it to make an approach. So you can say, we've got a fabulous new product. Would you like to be added to our mailing list for it? Here's the details.
Yeah.
You can do that, but you cannot just send email or text, you know, every single week, humbling them with all of these things.
But that approach needs to be personal initially, doesn't it? Not on the mailing list. Is that right?
Well, there's other things. So if you lift this data up and then you use some kind of AI technology, then you're really in the doo-doo. You know, that's really frowned upon. So whenever, and we can do a lot as individuals, all right? So if we get telephone calls, and there's loads at the minute from people pretending to be from HMRC with an NI number fraud. So if you try and ring the number back, it's unobtainable. Make sure you pass those numbers through to Action Fraud. It's the only way that we're going to start to make inroads on stopping these kind of practices, is if these people are caught.
Yeah, and there's a thing on the, I don't know if everybody's phone does it now, but there's a thing that happens on my phone that you can mark calls as spam as well. So that's quite a useful thing to do, because then that gets sort of registered as a thing. Any other questions? So no. Okay, thanks Ian, really appreciate that. Good presentation, mate.